Hey guys, so today we are going to talk a little bit about immutable JavaScript and the immutable JavaScript libraries out there. So let's get into it. Now, it wasn't all that long ago when Facebook announced that they had come up with this idea, right? And the idea was basically that we felt that with the wave of functional programming and all the best practices that come with functional programming, we had the need for immutable data structures. And although this is of course not necessarily the exact reason why immutable JS and so forth came about, I think that it had a heavy influence from this idea that immutability is a powerful thing, and it is. It is absolutely a powerful thing, and used correctly, it's probably one of the most important practices that, or rather, at least the sort of practice that will give you just off the bat better software. And that's a great thing, right? But what I think is a little bit odd is that people have been asking me why, because I may at some point have mentioned that certain tools that are all about functional, I've told people that I don't think that this is the right way to go. I think that there are better ways to spend your time than learning some of these tools, because I argue that there's a sweet spot to things. I think that if you go too deep into the functional programming hype, you are simply going to become a functional nerd. You're going to get a diminishing return on investment, because not everything about functional programming is genius. There's a lot of things that are genius, but some things I think are not so genius, and I think that some things you are only excited about because you're simply excited about functional programming as a concept. You're not actually thinking about what the benefits are for using certain concepts. And this is something that I think is the case for something like, say, immutable JS. And let me explain why. So what I will argue, this could be 100% incorrect, of course, but what I will argue is that with React, this idea of a stateless flow and composition and all of these functional style practices came about to JavaScript, or it at least became very popular in JavaScript. And then you had Redux that came around and basically just kind of snowballed the whole situation here, and it made functional programming even more popular. And then people started talking about something, like immutable JS. It doesn't have to be just immutable JS, but this idea of immutability. But let's examine that for a moment, because I got the question from a subscriber. So, do you think immutable JS and all these other, like, functional libraries are they're not good? And I said, no, I don't at all. I have not said that at all. What I'm stating is that I don't think you understand what it is that these things are providing. And once you understand what is offered by these immutability libraries, I will actually argue that maybe it's not as valuable as you think it is. Or maybe I'm missing something. Let's see. Because the way that I think about it is that, all right, so immutable JS allows you to create immutable data structures. Great. Why do you want to create an immutable data structure in JavaScript? Because if you think about it, having something immutable is great if you are doing it for, say, performance reasons. And maybe, but like, still, okay, performance, yeah, that could probably be a difference, but considering how much other garbage you most likely are doing that's creating much worse performance, if you will, in your JavaScript code, because let's not kid ourselves. If you had absolutely everything immutable in a code base, that's probably not going to be the thing that slows down your entire system. There's going to be most likely more things that are going to affect things. So, all right, so maybe that's not the real reason why you're making something immutable. Okay, let's think about something else. Well, in thread-based programming, immutable is a really good thing, because if you've ever tried to implement threads in, say, Java or something, you will know how hard it is to trust that the reference you have to a variable or something is always going to be the same. And that's great when you have something that is immutable, because you know that you can read the value and trust that it's always going to stay the same. You don't have to be so concerned with race conditions and one thread mutating a thread, and then the other thread is... there's all kinds of stuff that can happen when you do thread-based programming. So immutable is really great in that scenario, because you can always trust that you have the same value. But what about JavaScript? Well, JavaScript isn't thread-based. You don't have multiple threads, unless you use something like a web worker or something like that, I suppose. But that's also a bit of a corner case, I would say. In traditional thread-based programming, you have the issue that if your value is not immutable, you can't trust that you have the same reference all the time. So, okay, so not that maybe, not thread-based, because JavaScript is single-threaded, right? So what else is there? Maybe it's developer mistakes, because that's the one that I'm thinking that is probably the most likely. People having like a classic mistake that people will make is that you have some type of global state, like a singleton, well, not necessarily a singleton, but you have some type of global state, and then you have a bunch of references there, and then you have one component in your code that doesn't update to a value, and everything's great, right? But the problem is that when you have this, and this is true for every language that have like the singleton pattern and all this stuff, if you have multiple areas of your code and they mutate all these values on the global state, then you have to be really sure that you're not mutating one thing when another thing is expecting something different. It kind of comes back to this problem that you have with thread-based programming. So we solved that, in my personal opinion, in a very nice way with Redux. Redux solves this extremely well, because when you have an event loop or an event dispatching system, you can trust that everybody gets notified when something changes, and nobody can mutate the state without making sure that everybody knows that the state just mutated. That's really powerful. So why is immutability so important there? Well, my personal argument is that it's important because if you don't abide by these best practices, you might find yourself making all these mistakes where you do mutations on your data structures, and you start kind of going back to the old way of doing things where you had all these issues. So here's my thought on that. So if the main benefit of having something immutable in JavaScript is that you don't fuck up, maybe you should focus more on understanding how to write software so that you don't make this mistake, instead of adding a library that actually gives you a performance hit. Don't kid yourself. Immutable JS and all these libraries, they're not for free. They're giving, and that's what I argue. That's the conclusion I came to. I've been writing software for a few years now in React, and I have never had an issue where immutability would have solved that issue. Ever. Never. Ever, ever, ever. Why is that? Well, that's actually, I had this discussion with an old colleague of mine, and I said, the reason why I don't have an issue is because I'm aware of best practices. I'm aware of how dangerous it is to mutate references and do all of these things. I already know about it. So why would I need a library that enforces it for me? Why? Because there are situations where I absolutely want to mutate things, where I consciously want to do it. So if I'm aware of it and I never do these dangerous mutations, what value is the library bringing me? Well, nothing. Nothing at all. And that's where I think that people are making a mistake. I think that that the hype of functional programming has grown to a point where some people stop thinking. It's the same thing with monads. I see not just juniors, I see programmers who they get so excited about monads that they start throwing in monads right into the code base for no other reason than they think it's mentally stimulating. It's an interesting concept. They haven't even thought about whether or not it makes sense to have a monad here. They simply throw it in and they don't consider anything besides the engineering orgasm that they get in their head. And I think Immutable JS is the same thing. for the most part. I'm pretty sure that there are situations where it will make a lot of sense to use these sorts of libraries, but I can't off the bat think of any good reason in React land or Redux land or whatever. I really can't. And if you really wanted to make something completely like immutable, not necessarily an array or something like that, but have you ever thought about object.freeze? It's not perfect, but if you really need something to be immutable, that could be an option. And there are other ways to make things immutable as well. Just thinking about it. I don't want to try to tell you not to use immutable JS or things of that nature. I'm just asking you if you have really thought about why you get excited about immutability. Why is it such a great thing? Because as I told you, I have never been in a project where it has made any difference. And the only time I can in JavaScript land now, because as I said, it's a big difference in JavaScript, which is single-threaded, versus doing thread-based programming in another programming language. But in JavaScript, never had an issue. If you are already aware of the fact that you shouldn't be doing these dangerous mutations in your code, then the value of that library is it's almost non-existent. So maybe you should think about really think about why are you using these immutable practices before you start adding them into your code base and slowing down your application in favor of something that may not be so valuable after all. Have a great day.